Good morning. Glad to see everybody here today. If you're in the class, come on in and have a seat. We'll be talking again from the Gospel of Mark, and we've had several lessons out of the Gospel already. What we're going to be talking about this morning is on the topic of faith. And I'll give a few minutes here for a few more people to get out. We're having several conversations going on, so it's kind of hard for me to talk over that. I am glad to see everybody here today. I hope you've had a nice week. I got some bad news. My brother's wife had a seizure. She had a stroke many years ago and has had some medical problems ever since, but she went into a seizure about the 4th of August and then went to the hospital, spent a couple of days there. They released her, and she went to sleep last Sunday night and has not woken up since then. So right now they've got her on a ventilator, but she seems to be able to breathe on her own, so they're going to take her off the ventilator, I think, tomorrow. But they really don't see much hope for her recovery ever again. So if you would, please remember my sister-in-law, Lou Ann, as you take your time with your life this week. Lou Ann Hinton. We are going to be talking about faith, and one of the ways that we exercise our faith is by praying for those that we care for, those that we think can benefit from that for various reasons. The Bible defines faith in Hebrews chapter 11. Most of you are aware of the definition that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews further on also tells us that without faith it is impossible to please God, for those who come to Him must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. That's what faith is. All right, it's something that we have to have. It's an internal thing. It's in our hearts. It's a noun, although to make it real, it has to be acted upon. Right? It has to be a verb also. Typically, we use faith as a noun. We use the word believe as a verb to have faith in someone. Faith, the word, only shows up in the Gospel of Mark 5 times. It's found more often in other books, but Mark actually only uses the word faith about 5 times. Now, believe shows up 11 or 12 times, and the word trust shows up once, but the word faith is only there 5 times. And we learned several things about faith in this Gospel. Not really especially new, because Matthew and Luke also talk about the same sorts of stories and bring out the same points. But one of the things that we find in here from the very beginning is at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, He set out calling people to believe the gospel that He was preaching. So in a sense, you were believing in Him by believing the words that He was saying. So that's the grounding of that. And towards the end of the gospel, we find the ultimate concept of salvation, the ultimate benefit of salvation, Mark 16, 15, and 16. Whoever believes and is baptized shall be saved, but he who does not believe shall be condemned. So faith is necessary for salvation. If it's not done in faith, all you did was get wet. So there's more to it than just the action. The faith has to be part of that as well. One of the things that we find about faith, of course, is that we do get benefits from having faith in God. We had a really good example here just a minute ago, a woman who asked for prayers for her son for finding his wallet and for getting a job, and he did accomplish both of those. My wife left her wallet in a cart at a store recently and went back. As you get older, that happens more often. How many have had that? No. I haven't done that myself. My wallet goes back in my pocket, but my wife carries hers in her hands, and quite often she puts it in the cart and carries the cart out to the car and puts things in, then carries the cart over and leaves the wallet in there. Anyway, she did get it back. First time she looked, she thought all the money was gone, but at least she got the wallet back. And later she looked again. You know how some of these wallets are. You have several different compartments in there. So she flipped around in there, eventually found out the cash was actually still in there. So she was glad to find that there are still people out there that will trust to the sanctity of your property. How have you benefited from faith in your life? What are the things that you think you've gotten only because you had faith in God? The fact that we're here today, alive and healthy, okay? Yeah, that's one thing I think that we pray to God for is on our health and for a long life, a happy life. And so we can point to that as something that we have as a benefit from God. Yes? Okay. Faith and the hope in the face of troubles that you're dealing with, right? I just mentioned the situation in my life and my brother's life more than mine, and that's one of the things I'm sure that he's holding on to is hope that things will turn out for the best. And there's always struggles that we face. Without God, there is no hope, because without God, we just die and we're gone, and that's it. Hope can only exist in the existence of God. Right. Right. Yeah. Our day-to-day life, we have struggles, things that we face, things that can cause stress in our lives. I remember there was a list of here's things that cause stress: losing a job, getting a divorce, things like that. Gaining a job actually causes stress because now you've got this new challenge ahead of you. But having God there to support you is a wonderful thing to reduce the stress that you have. I remember the story of this one guy that every day he went to work, and of course there's stresses involved in work. He'd come home and walk over to this tree, and he'd do this. And his wife would see him doing this every day, and the next morning he'd go out there and do the reverse. And it's like, well, every day I come home, I put my stresses on that tree, so I don't bring them in and put them on you. And so that was one of the ways that he dealt with it. But certainly I think God's a better support than a tree. So I'm going to pass those on to him, let him deal with them. Anybody else? Yes, Otha. A marriage. Okay, right. I met my wife at church, and if I had not been going to church, I never would have known her at all. So there's relationships. We develop a lot of relationships with people here at church that if we had not been a member of the church, that would not have come up. So we can thank God for many of the things that we face, that we've received in our lives. In the Gospel of Mark, there is a three-part demonstration of faith versus lack of faith. First of all, there's a couple of times that people came to Jesus and he says to them, your faith has made you whole. One of these is found in Mark chapter 5, I think is where it is. Yes, Mark chapter 5. Starting in verse 21, we have the synagogue leader Jairus coming to Jesus and saying, my daughter's ill, would you come and heal her? And then along the way, Jesus and Jairus and all these people are walking along. There's this crowd of people around Jesus, and there's this woman with an issue of blood. And she had gone out to several different doctors to try to get healed for that, and none of them could do her any good. And the woman sees Jesus and says to herself, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. That's the amount of faith that she had. She didn't feel like, I guess, she didn't feel like she had enough standing to go up to Jesus and ask him to heal her, but she did nevertheless say, all I've got to do is just touch his clothes. So she went and reached out and touched him, or touched his clothing, and she was healed of her flow of blood. Now, the disciples wondered when Jesus stopped and said, who touched me? Why are you asking that? Don't you see this crowd of people around you? Everybody's touching you. But Jesus knew that something different had gone on with this particular touch. So he looked around, and the woman finally fessed up and said, yes, it was me. See, here's my problem, and now I've been healed. Thank you so much. And Jesus said to her, verse 34, he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Your faith has made you well. So it was her belief in Jesus that led to her being healed. And part of that belief is her actions. It wouldn't have been enough for her to just say, all I've got to do is touch his clothing and then not go touch his clothing. There were a few cases in the Bible where people were healed just by looking at something, all right? In the Old Testament, there was one time when the children of Israel were wandering through the wilderness, and they had committed some sin, so God sent snakes among them. And whoever was bitten by the snakes would get poisoned and die. But God had Moses make a snake, a bronze snake, and hold it up. And so anybody that looked on that snake would be healed. So all they had to do was look. Of course, if you said, well, looking won't help me, I'm just going to go ahead and die, well, then I guess you wouldn't look, you'd die. But in this case, the woman had faith, and she acted on that faith. There's another case in Mark where Jesus said faith can be seen, or he gave evidence of that. And this is a little bit earlier in the Gospel of Mark, where the man was paralyzed and he could not walk, and Jesus was in a house where there was a crowd of people around him, and his friends couldn't carry him into the building, so they carried him on top of the building, cut a hole in the roof, and lowered him down through the roof for Jesus to heal. And it says, when Jesus saw their faith, this is in verse 5, when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven of you." But he saw their faith. They were believing that Jesus could do him some good, and they acted on that faith. We are going to do this much for you because we believe that Jesus has this power to heal you of your sickness. There is, of course, then the argument about whether or not Jesus had the ability to forgive sins, but later on he does say in verse 11, "I say to you, arise, take up your bed, and go to your house." Immediately he arose, took up his bed, and went out in the presence of them all, so that all were amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." So faith can be seen in the actions that we carry out as a result of our faith. When I was younger, I remember hearing this question being asked, sort of a rhetorical question. If you were arrested and put on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? And of course, the idea being that other people should know that you're a Christian and be able to tell that you're a Christian. There should be evidence in your life. Our lives should be different if we're a Christian versus if we're not a Christian. There are some things that we should be doing, like going to Bible class, right? Perfect example, since we're right here doing this at the time. Attending church services, singing songs of praise to God, giving to help carry forward the mission of the church, God's mission in saving other people in the world around us. Various things that we can do to show our faith in God that other people should be able to see. Not that we're trying to make a show of it. Jesus condemned that idea of, giving so that other people could see how much you're giving, that sort of thing. But certainly, it should be evident in our lives that we are Christians. I could ask the question, what are you doing to let other people know that you're a Christian? But the main thing is to save souls, not to show other people how Christian we are. So there's the other side of this. Remember, we're talking about faith and the benefits of faith. So the woman had faith in Jesus, and she was healed. The people of the city of or town of Nazareth, however, had the opposite problem. They did not have faith in Jesus, and as a result, he couldn't do much good for them. This is found in chapter 6 of Mark. Nazareth, of course, was the town where Jesus grew up. He wasn't born in Nazareth. He was born in Bethlehem, and then his parents took him to Egypt for a few years when Herod died, the Herod who was king when Jesus was born, who wanted to kill him because it was prophesied that he would become a king. And of course, Herod wanted to be king, and for his children after him to remain kings as well. But at any rate, when they came back to Israel, they did not want to go back to Bethlehem down south where the new Herod was reigning. They went up to Galilee where there was a different person in charge up there. So the town they moved to was Nazareth, and so most people thought of Jesus as a Nazarene, although truth to tell, he was born in Bethlehem. At any rate, the people of Nazareth remembered Jesus as a child, and they knew his brothers and sisters, and they were just ordinary people like everybody else. They didn't see any reason why Jesus ought to have these special powers and abilities and knowledge that he seemed to be claiming to have. Jesus says a prophet is not without honor except in his own country and among his own relatives and in his own house, because they knew him when he was just a little boy and wasn't anything special. Now he could do no mighty work there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them, and he marveled because of their unbelief. So here's a case where people failed to believe or would not believe in Jesus, and as a result of that, they did not receive any benefit. He did heal a few people there. Obviously, there were a few people in Nazareth that had enough faith in him to get some benefit out of that, but most of the people just refused to believe that there was anything special about him, that he could do any of these things, and their lack of belief led to them not receiving benefits that they could otherwise have taken advantage of. The fact is, of course, that there's lots of people in the world around us today that believe the same thing, that Jesus has no ability to provide us any benefits whatsoever. In the middle, however, there are people that sort of have faith and sort of don't have faith, and the example here is found in Mark, let's see where it is, marriage and divorce. Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 14, the demon-possessed son. This is right after Jesus went up to the mountain with 3 of his disciples and was transfigured there, and he came back down and found out that his other disciples had been approached by this man who had a son. The Gospel of Mark says that the son had a mute spirit. Verse 17, verse 18, whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, he foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid, which sounds a lot to me like a person with epilepsy, but I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not. So here's this problem, and there were scribes and Pharisees around also, and they, of course, would have made fun of them. It's like, well, you say you have this leader and teacher who's able to do all these things, and why can't you? You can't cast this out any more than we can, so you don't have anything special. The man, of course, when Jesus came, he spoke to the man and asked him, what's going on? And the father was asked, well, how long has this been happening to him? And the man said, well, from childhood, and often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have a compassion on us and help us. Okay, so that next verse in Mark chapter 9, verse 23, somebody who's got, say, the New International Version, read verse 23 to me. Okay, so that's stated as a question, all right? And the idea is expressed there that Jesus is responding to the question, if you can, with a, what do you mean if I can? Of course I can. I've got all these abilities, haven't you seen these? But in the older versions, which use different texts as the main source of information, I've got the New King James that says, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. I really like this idea of Jesus saying, if you can. It's, anyway, the father of the child immediately cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Well, do you believe or not? Do you believe or do you not believe? Help my unbelief. Well, he's right in the middle there. He wants to believe because he sees the benefit of having that belief, but in his heart, he's thinking, his disciples couldn't help me. Why should I think that the teacher would be anything more than the students are? But it turns out that he still asks for help. It doesn't say it here, but in the telling of this in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus brings out the idea of having faith as a mustard seed, all right, a very small seed. And if you've got that much faith, you will be able to move mountains, all right? And so I think maybe the man had that little bit of faith that he was willing to go out on a limb and say, if you can help him, have compassion on us and help us. I'm willing to take that chance that you can actually do something in this situation. My son needs your help. And so he had that intermediate faith, but it was enough, all right, to receive a benefit for that. So if your faith is this big, good. If it's that big, you still got faith, right? Got enough to get what you need. The deal, of course, here is that we need to be aware of the amount of faith that we have and work on improving that and increasing that. I think it's very important, of course, as Christians for us to increase our own faith, do what we can to increase the faith of others, and help to create faith in those who have none. Benefits that God is offering come only to those who have faith in him. One other thing I wanted to mention with regards to these three stories about Jesus healing people is the concept of the faith healer that's out today in a lot of places. Don't see this as much today here in America, but it's still around in a lot of places that if you just go to this faith healer, they will heal you of your diseases, your illnesses, or whatever. And then if you don't get healed, the answer is you just didn't have enough faith. And they will point to passages like Nazareth and this that says your faith healed you, and so it's your fault that you didn't get healed. The reason I think why the people at Nazareth didn't get healed wasn't because Jesus couldn't heal them. It was because they wouldn't go to him for healing. If you don't believe that this doctor can fix your problem, you're not going to go to this doctor. You're going to go to that doctor that you think can do you some benefit. Ridge saw two doctors who worked on his back. The first one might have actually made his situation worse, but the second one was the one that actually provided him with a benefit. So I don't want to go to that first doctor because I don't think if I ever have to have back surgery, I don't want to go to that first doctor. I want to go to the one he found second, the one that I trust, that I have faith in, that would be able to do me some good. And in the same way, the people of Nazareth didn't trust the doctor. They didn't think Jesus could do them any good. Why would they give him the opportunity to do anything? That was why their faith wouldn't allow them to be healed. This man had enough faith to at least go to the doctor and say, here's my son. I don't know if you can do him any good, but give it a shot. I'll take what I can get. So there's some things that we see about faith that we need to have faith in order to receive benefits from God. The Nazarenes were not the only people that lacked faith, and it's not like healing is the only area in our lives where we might need to have faith. The disciples had difficulties from time to time. One example is found back in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. Mark chapter 4, 35. This is right after the parable of the mustard seed, which isn't about mustard seed faith. It's a parable about the kingdom of God growing like a mustard seed and filling the earth. But verse 35, it says, on the same day when evening had come, he said to them, let us cross over to the other side. It doesn't say, but we would assume this was of the Sea of Galilee. Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling, but he was in the stern asleep on a pillow. Really? How tired must Jesus have been to be able to sleep through that? My wife and I were once on a small boat out on the water, and it was moving really fast, and being a small boat, it didn't go through the waves, it went up and down with the waves, and it bounced us all over the place. And I had my best night's sleep after that was over ever because it wore me out. But I couldn't sleep on that boat. I could not have slept on that boat. I don't see how Jesus, now I guess he fell asleep before the storm hit, but nevertheless, eventually, I think I would have woken up somewhere along the way. Thankfully, I'm not subject to seasickness. I've been on boats a few times, and I don't get seasick, but a lot of people would be in that situation. The boat's bouncing around. It's actually starting to fill with water, and the disciples are getting really, really worried about this. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Our boat's about to go under, and you're just sleeping out there. Aren't you worried? Don't you care about us at all? And so Jesus rises up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. Got a great song on that in our songbook. He said to them, why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? Now, faith is one of those things that sometimes we claim to have, and certainly we exercise that faith and show that faith in certain circumstances, but every now and then something comes along and we act as if we don't believe in God. We act as if we lack that faith, and the disciples certainly did that here. Abraham, Mark has just given a series of lessons about Abraham. There were a couple of times in Abraham's life where he acted like he didn't have much faith in God. And there were times when he was going into a new country where there were leaders there that he did not know him. Abraham had a lot of property, but the thing that he liked the most was his wife, who at the age of 80 or something like that was still beautiful enough that he was afraid that when he went into these countries, the leaders of those countries would kill him and take his wife. And they actually did, because they told everybody, this is my sister, half-sister actually, and didn't say that, and my wife too. So he left that piece of information out in an attempt to prevent them from killing him. He didn't have faith in God to the point where he could say, yes, this is my wife. God's protecting me. I'm going to let everybody know. I'm going to be safe because I know God has plans for me. All right? In the same way, Jesus knew what God's plans were for him. He was not going to die in this boat on the Sea of Galilee along with his disciples. They were going to get across safely. His death was going to come at a different time. This was not in the plans. But the disciples didn't know this. They were not aware yet of Jesus' future plans of what was going to take place to him in Jerusalem. And so they were worried. Maybe this is it. You know, he's got all these great teachings and he's done all these wonderful things, but we're out on this sea and there's a storm and boats sink and people die. Yes? Right. Yeah. Yeah, so what she's saying is that sometimes we get what we need, but not on our schedule. We have an idea, this is when I need it. I need this right now, this instant. And since I'm not getting it, I lose my faith or it decreases. And God acts on his time scale, his timetable, and things get done according to when he would have them to be done. Sometimes, of course, the answer is no. But other times, you know, we do have to consider the possibility that later, not now, maybe later. Right? The answers that God gives to prayers are yes and no and maybe later. Right? You know, there are verses in the Bible that talk about prayer that Philippians 4:13, I believe, is the one that says that ask and you will, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But there's also a verse in the Bible that says, whatever you pray for, if you believe when you ask, you will receive it. All right. Paul didn't. All right. Paul had that prayer a couple of times that he asked for God to remove that thorn in his flesh. And after the third time, Jesus told him to quit asking, which is an answer I hope never to receive. But God said that it is for my glory, that you have this thorn in the flesh and you're still able to accomplish these things, brings glory to me. So we have to be aware of the fact that sometimes what I want to happen is not the best thing that could happen to me. Farmers ask for rain. People getting married ask for there to be no rain. So you can't please everybody. There was a movie where Jim Carrey was the star of the movie, and he was given God's powers for a period of time. And he had to answer all the prayers to God, so he got on his computer, you know, his prayer app, and basically he just said yes, yes, yes to all these prayers that people were sending. They'd all asked to win the lottery. And the next day, they all had won the lottery. They all got 2 cents because they had to spread all the money out between everybody that asked to win the lottery. Of course, there was another guy that asked to win the lottery. Every night before he went to bed, he says, please, God, let me win the lottery. Please, God, let me win the lottery. After about a week of this, God finally said to him, buy a ticket. You know, there are certain things that we need to do to help God to get the things that we want. You know, if you want to do well on that test, study for the test. I can help you out, but you've got to study. And there are definitely cases like that. Anyway, the disciples, Jesus says, how is it that you have no faith? So even people that were right there with Jesus weren't aware of the specific situations where he could help them out. Perhaps this was done in order to increase their faith. In the long run, they benefited from this. because they knew, now look at what he can do. It even says, who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? So faith is certainly something that can grow. Right, can start out as a mustard seed, and through the actions and things that happen to us in our lives, we would hope that that faith would continue to grow and become stronger. Work always to see the good out of whatever happens to you in life. I still wonder how tired Jesus must have been. You know, we have stories of him going off to be alone, away from the crowds, and he was awake and doing things for long hours of the day. To sleep on the boat under those circumstances must have been extremely tired by that point. So we have a number of other words that show up in the Gospel of Mark that relate to this idea of faith. Belief, or believe, the command to believe shows up a lot, and that is actually found in the story of the man with the son who had a mute spirit, that all things are possible to those who believe. And so there are benefits to that. Jesus walked on the water, and it's interesting. That's found in Mark chapter 6. It's also found in the other Gospels, and in at least one of the Gospels, we know that Peter said to Jesus, if it's really you, ask me to come out to see you. And Jesus did, and so Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water. That's not in this gospel. All right, now, why might that not be in this gospel? Well, who was the author? That was Mark, and who did he get this information from? Well, that was Peter. So maybe they left it out for that reason, but there were some other things in here about Peter's faith, Peter's struggles with faith, that lead us to believe that that was not left out because he didn't want to embarrass Peter. I'm certain that the idea of denying God, Jesus 3 times, was a greater embarrassment to Peter than the fact that he got out of the boat. Right? You look at the other 11 apostles and say, well, they had more faith than Peter did. Well, they didn't get out of the boat in the first place. At least Peter got out there. He struggled once he did, but none of the rest of the apostles got out. There's other people that had faith in God, and it's not just the case that we have to find the word faith or believe or trust to see faith in this gospel. The Syrophoenician's daughter in chapter 7, the Syrophoenician woman had faith. She came to Jesus even though she was a Gentile, and even though Jesus at first said, no, I'm not going to do it. She kept on pushing and kept on asking, and eventually, because of something she said, Jesus did agree to heal her daughter. It was her faith and her willingness to go the extra mile for her daughter that led eventually to her salvation or her healing from that. The ultimate, of course, is towards the end of the Gospel of Mark, where we read about Jesus' resurrection. And several people, of course, saw Jesus' death on the cross, understood that he was dead, and then suddenly on Sunday, they started hearing stories about the fact that he wasn't in the grave anymore, that he must have risen from the dead, and people didn't believe anyway. It starts off in verse 9 of chapter 16. When he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him as they mourned and wept. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe. And after that, he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they walked out in the country. This might have been the men on their way to Emmaus. And they went and told it to the rest, but they didn't believe them either. So they wouldn't believe these reports. Their faith was not in Mary Magdalene. Their faith was not in those 2 people, and so they didn't necessarily believe that they were telling them the truth. Verse 14, it says, he appeared to the 11 as they sat at the table. He first appeared to 10 of them with Thomas being absent. You read this in the Gospel of John. But at this point, Thomas was now present with them. He rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart. These people told you the truth. Why didn't you believe them when they told you this? Hadn't I told you that, after 3 days? He doesn't actually say that. their unbelief and hardness of heart because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. So there's a lot of things about faith in this gospel, even if we don't see the word faith there. But in the end, the ultimate is the necessity of faith for salvation. Verse 16, he who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. That is necessary for salvation. We cannot be pleasing to God without faith in him and in his ability to help those who diligently seek him. He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. It's not enough to believe that God exists. We also have to believe that he has our best interests at heart. It's always important in life for us to have faith in Jesus. He also wants us to have faith in ourselves. I mentioned this earlier. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. If you don't believe you can succeed at something, you're not going to attempt to do it. With Christ's help, you have the strength to do what needs to be done. There are certainly things that Jesus wouldn't want us to do and will not give us the strength to help us to do those things. But things that we can do, we need to believe that we have help from God and attempt those, put our best effort forth, and try to accomplish the things that we know need to be done. I'm watching a TV show right now that features a guy that gets a second chance at life. So he goes back and makes different decisions this time. He believes that one of the main decisions that he kept making over and over again that hurt him in his previous attempt at life was that when he heard something was impossible, he just gave up on it. He did not try, did not attempt to accomplish those things. This time, as he's going through life, he's faced several situations where he is told, you can't do that. This can't be done. This is just impossible. We might as well give up. And he's not willing to give up because he saw how his failure to attempt things led to a lack of success in his previous life, and he didn't want that to happen when he's been given this second chance. We might not be given a second chance to accomplish things. We need to take that with us as soon as we can and accomplish what we can with our faith in God's support for our lives. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you for coming. I think that's about it. Not sure what we'll talk about next week, but one other thing I think you should pray about. There was an earthquake in Haiti, I believe it was recently, and they've got a storm that's passing through. They're saying they don't think it's going to become a hurricane, but still a tropical storm coming through at this time will probably lead to some flooding and further death and destruction there. So pray for the people of Haiti at this time as well. Yes? Jack Graham. Right. Jack Graham died Saturday, and the funeral service will be here Wednesday at 3:30. 11:30. 11:30 services for Jack Graham here. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and close with a prayer. Lord, we thank you for all your many wonderful blessings. Thank you for allowing us to be here to study from your word. We ask at this time, Lord, that you would be with the people of Haiti as they're suffering the effects of an earthquake and are facing a coming storm as well, that you might help them through this time and help them to get over the difficulties that they're having this time. Be with Jack Graham's family at this time. Help to strengthen them at this low time in their lives. For these things we pray in Christ's name. Amen.